Probably about a third of the upper middle class women I know just have a therapist. Like they've had a therapist since childhood. If you date them or marry them, it's a bill, like hairdressing. And I think that's profoundly unhealthy.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome. I'm here today with Wilfred Reilly, who's a professor at Kentucky State. He is author of Taboo, Hate Crime Hoax, and Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me. I'm so excited to have you here. So welcome, Dr. Reilly.
Yeah, glad to be on.
Awesome. So I'd like to start out with finding out people's backgrounds. Tell me who you are, where you come from.
Yeah, well, my background is pretty diverse. Like I'm from Chicago originally. My mom is Black and a bit Native. My dad's British, and I was born in the city itself. I've lived on the South Side. I've lived on the North Side. In high school, I ended up moving to Aurora, which is the second largest city in Illinois, for sort of academic and athletic reasons. I mean, the schools were a lot better, that kind of thing. But I was sort of a working class kid. I mean, this was the rave era. I was kind of a skater as well. Just sort of a normal, probably like white t-shirt, gold cross. Very, God damn it, what is this fucking noise? Let me close my other window here. All right. So anyway, yeah, so just a normal background. I was kind of a working class kid. I thought if I didn't get into college, I would probably join the army. But in fact, I got into quite a few colleges. I now realize that being African American, Native, and also probably a legacy on my mom's side, the Chicago Ward family is actually a pretty well-known Black family. My mother had wanted to teach and had taught in a series of inner city schools, finally East Aurora High School. But I mean, that probably didn't hurt when I started sending the old applications in. But I actually just ended up going to some of the schools in state. I went to Northern Illinois very briefly. I went to Southern Illinois, which was a fun experience. I mean, SIU Carbondale at that time was Playboy's like number 5 party school or something like that. So that's pretty much what the campus was known for. I mean, it was a top 200 university, but its primary distinction was that there were large scale parties, occasional riots, and so on. This is still something you can look up on the campus. But I got a little more serious while I was down there, and I was very young at this time. I mean, I graduated from high school when I was, I think, 17. That's the oldest it could have been. I'd gotten socially promoted through one of the grades earlier in school. I don't mean to make fun of the Chicago and Aurora public schools, but I could read, which gave me a pretty substantial advantage. So, I mean, I got out rapidly and directly went into college and goofed around a bit my first year or two, but gradually realized I was fairly good at this. And Rob Henderson and other people have told similar stories. But graduated in 3 years from SIU. So at this point, I would be 20 or 21. I was 20, actually. I wasn't old enough to drink when I got to law school legally. But I
Well,
applied.
you weren't old enough to drink when you got to law school?
No, I remember it was kind of an issue. There was still an undergrad style social life at the University of Illinois, and as a law student, I was well enough liked there. But I remember that trying to do kind of like classy adult things with dates and so on was an issue. Yeah, you'd go to stores and try to buy alcohol, and I distinctly remember that until December of my 1L year, I was 20. So I was kind of a kid through a lot of this period, and that's why the academic development took a bit. That also shaped a lot of my views on IQ, by the way. I mean, the first time I took a pre-SAT test or something like that, my score was okay, but it was around 1100. And by the time I took the GRE when I was only 22 or some such, I mean, my score was 1440. And they've increased since then on proxy exams I've taken and so on. So there's a level of potential people have, but obviously training at a gym is going to improve your actual physical performance. And then joining the varsity is going to improve you from there. And then getting a trainer or a coach or just 3 buddies you work out with, that's going to improve you from there. And the same thing I think is true intellectually. But at any rate, I mean, I went to law school. And that was just, it was what it was. It was law school. Illinois is a top 25, big U, that produces a lot of people that go on to say Jenner in Chicago. Again, I was still pretty immature there, but I got out. I had reasonable grades, and I was trying to figure out what to do because I was still quite young. The field of law I'd been interested in, white collar criminal prosecution, would have been available, but I mean, that's dead serious kind of stuff. So I had also applied in my final year to a couple of graduate schools, and I was readmitted by Southern Illinois. And actually, this is where things kind of get interesting. Like, I expected to get a PhD in 5 years, come out and become kind of a junior executive jackass for a couple of years, and then, do whatever, possibly go into academia. But while I was at Southern, about year 3, my mom got very sick. So I ended up coming back to Chicago and doing for like 8 years all these crazy urban jobs. I was a canvas manager for the Human Rights Campaign, which is a group that does sort of modern day freedom writing. This was for gay rights at this time. I still actually support gay rights, just not what they've kind of transmogrified into. But I mean, our office was on the south side of Chicago. It was one of the classic city kid jobs. Like Chicago is really well known for comedians. Second City is based there and so on. So we had all these comics that were trying to become famous that were on the canvas staff. And we would travel around the city and sometimes the country and just pitch things like, hey, got a minute for gay marriage? And it's an entertaining job. I mean, there's a fair amount of physical violence. There are definitely a lot of confrontations. Like, what the hell are you doing in my neighborhood? As we got down to the south side, so on. Um, I did that for a couple of years. I got tired of standing in the street fighting people, sort of, and applied to another one of the sort of classic sales trading floors. I worked for Marcus Evans International, the British company that connects CEOs, and it's known for, not sketchy, but aggressive outreach. Like you have to find out how to get people cell phones. It's a bullpen full of guys. Everyone's sales are up on a board, and you have to, get in touch with the target pool was the CEOs of mid-market companies who our clients wanted us to recruit to meet with them. So, I mean, you'd have sort of a wish list, at least at the management level, from like Walmart. LifeLock Insurance was at one point a client of mine without revealing any more details there. But I mean, just these guys would go in and they'd talk at corporate events and so on with the guys we had on retainer or that we'd worked with in the past. So anyway, I just did that for a while. Typical, wear a jacket and shout at people job. I taught in the city colleges of Chicago, which is itself an interesting experience. Like Malcolm X is a typical name for the Chicago City colleges. So they're scattered all around the traditional ethnic neighborhoods of the city. And if I wanted to keep my hand in academically while I was working with mom and while I was on the bullpen, which is in the Wrigley building, like the Trib Tower, by the way. So other than Wall Street, kind of the classic cliche urban job, like you're looking down at the river, people are going by in boats, some guy's writing like 1,700,000 on this whiteboard. But to maintain my academic credentials, which is necessary, otherwise you'd age out of the teaching game. I taught in the CCC. I taught at Harry Truman for a while, which is far north in Chicago. I'd never taught in detail at like each one of them, but I did that, kind of passed through it, eventually got the PhD. And at this point, kind of the odyssey ended. Like I'd had this sort of interesting ethnic childhood, and I grew up in the country's second city, and I'd traveled around. I also spent some time in Latin America after high school, which is another interesting story. But at this point, the degree was done. So I just started applying to kind of solid tier 2 state colleges and received offers from a couple of them. Kentucky State, which is a historically black college in academia or in Appalachia, struck me as interesting in the sense that you could actually help kids. Like there would be people there that would be first generation college students that I could actually guide on to law school. And during my time in the program, myself and Dr. Amadife have sent, I think it's between 14 and 23, mostly young men onto law schools. Obviously, people have done other things as well. Frankfort is the Kentucky state capital, so the legislature is right down the street. But since then, I've been kind of a just normal college professor. The only difference is that I lean right, and I'm not entirely unentertaining. So I've been able to do a great deal of media, a great deal of book writing, where during kind of the woke fight a couple of years back, I was, as a quantitative guy, pointing out, like, none of this is true. Which is how I became prominent. The total number of unarmed black men killed by the police every year is 12. People are just lying. And here's my regression model. And I think that's what made me so prominent to the extent I am.
There's so much fascinating stuff there. And I'm trying to understand like why you are the way that you are. So you're like this skater kid kind of growing up. You've got this winding career with all these different interesting jobs. And you kind of become this person who, says all these things that other people are afraid to say. I feel like, on the quantitative side of things, you could have single-handedly debunked wokeness, but you're also, I think you went into like kind of the belly of the beast in some, was it American Renaissance to debate them? It's like, you just seem to be the guy who's not afraid to take on anybody.
Well, I think my inspiration, well, thanks first. I mean, I think my inspiration intellectually is Thomas Sowell, but there are a lot of other guys like Milton Friedman grew up as a working class Jewish kid. I mean, there are a lot of people. I guess one of my points would be you can never do anything innovative if you believe that your society's upper middle class cliches are real. Like what your society at a given time says about sexuality, morality, the limits of science, that's almost certainly wrong. And I think that's something to keep in mind. Like, I do think if I'm talking to a therapist and I've gone in for men's group counseling or something, like I should, listen to what they say. But there's also a level of understanding that everything they've said in the past has been at least 50% false. If you go back through lobotomy, if you go back through Freudian theory, Jungian theory, it's just all bullshit, and we've debunked it. So at some level, you're just talking to another smart middle or upper class person that's got an IQ of X and that's read some articles. And for me or for you, that's also true for the observer, for the person in the room with them. So I mean, I think that background kind of underlies the work I do. And I'm rambling a bit here. So to get back to the point, I think that if you grow up in ordinary life and you have to pull yourself out without over romanticizing like trading floors or, canvassing or something. I wasn't like picking up an axe and cutting down sequoias. But if you grow up among normal people and you see what works in normal life, and you have to apply those principles actually at a higher level to get Salesforce in my case, but if you have to apply those principles at a higher level to get to where you want to be, you generally begin something like professional study with a baseline set of accurate assumptions about what works. Like Sol's gone into great depth about this. For example, people respond to incentives. If you double the minimum wage, employers will hire fewer people. And so what is theoretically argued by a communist or a feminist or these days a dissident writer can be interesting. They can be a smart guy, but you have the ability coming from that background to compare it with what you've seen in actual reality. And I mean, I did pretty well in business. Like I lived in the hood, I've traveled overseas. Like I've seen, even going back to East Aurora, the south side of Chicago, the problems had very little to do with racism. In fact, in a modern day slum area, about a fourth of the people will be white and about a third will be Hispanic. So, I mean, the claim that's being made publicly is nonsensical. The things that I saw that were problematic were heavy drug use. That's especially true with poor whites. Gun violence is especially true with black males. An almost total collapse of the norms around dating and sex. So, I mean, my high school had like I don't know what you'd call it, but a facility in it for babies because we had so many pregnant students. So, I mean, like going from that to the first time I encountered woke theory would probably be my senior year at Southern Illinois or my 1L year at Illinois. But going from that to the
What year was that?
What's up?
What year was that?
Oh, this would be like 2005, maybe. But
Wow, okay.
well, I think it was more it was more the inexperience of background than the fact that this stuff wasn't yet prevalent. I mean, like Bell Hooks started writing in the 80s. I mean, Ferrari or whatever, I screw up his name, but started writing in 1968 with prominent works. But in general, normal Americans, whether you're talking about the heartland, you're talking about Appalachia, where I live now, you're talking about these kind of urban working class communities, they're not particularly woke. I mean, the term you hear a lot today, coined by Rob Henderson, is luxury beliefs. So to believe certain things like crime is entirely due to a lack of resources, when one of the most common crimes is rape, or taking the police off the streets won't have an effect on crime. Human bodies aren't naturally sexual if you read feminist quote-unquote theory. Like, to believe any of that stuff, I think you'd have to come from a fairly sheltered place as a high IQ person. And although I'm a high IQ person, I didn't have the first luxury. So anyway, the point is, like, a lot of people who come out of normal neighborhoods, who come out of the army, certainly the business world, when they encounter intellectual discourse, a lot of it sounds like nonsense. And if you're a quant, I think this is our advantage. You can often sort of prove it's nonsense. And the barrier is, are you really going to start saying that? And because, I mean, I was financially stable, definitely. And I also think because I didn't know this was supposed to be bad, I just kind of started saying it. And if I can give one example there, I mean, my dissertation, which became my first book, actually, an academic monograph that, 12 people read, but it looked at...
Was that Taboo?
No, that's the $50 million question. Yeah, I've written 4 or 5 books total, but I mean, I generally focus on the kind of major press, mainstream things that people have engaged with. But yeah, I wrote Hate, Crime, Hoax, Taboo, Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me. I have a new book that I just signed a deal on now. And the first book I wrote was literally just my dissertation. in all honesty, written up in book form. It's a nice book, but by one of those publishers that'll probably buy the top half of dissertations in a given year. I mean, so there are a lot of small academic presses out there. This was Scholars, I believe, but it just as a grad student, I saw no reason not to do that. The dissertation itself, though, is pretty solid. And what I did was look at one of the most famous kind of early woke claims. So have you ever heard of Andrew Hacker?
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's a pretty well-known guy. He's a smart guy. He teaches at city colleges of New York, actually. But Andrew Hacker, back in, I think, 1992, asked a group of young white men, and these are white guys in Queens, so there's all kind of humor to this. But he asked a group of young white men how much they'd have to be paid to be black, and the average answer was $50 million. And this spawned this whole subgenre that's been called VWT, value of whiteness theory, where you've got, I guess you'd put Kimberly Crenshaw in there. You've got the value of whiteness, Cheryl Harris, the paper. But the idea is that American society is so racist and oppressive that if you are a regular middle-class black citizen or you're a regular middle-class white citizen, you would pay millions of dollars not to be black. And the flip side assumption is that if you're black or Spanish, Hispanic, Asian maybe, you would probably pay money to become white. And in my dissertation, I look at a group of about 2,000 people, and I ask the question, like I give people an opt-out, this is dumb option. And then I ask people, in a scenario where technology existed to make this possible, how much would you have to be paid to become a member of another sort of friendly rival racial group? And so the hypothesis here is kind of the whites would demand a lot, the minorities would demand nothing. What we actually found was that the minorities in general were more racist than the whites, if you even view this as a measure of racism. So like the group most attached to their identities were old Asian men. But blacks,
Oh.
yeah. And if you ever talk to an older Easterner or even Indian, that's not surprising. Like, we were building Taj Mahals when your white and black ancestors were living in caves, Westerner. So that's a very advanced, long-term, opposing society to ours. Um, and trading partner, et cetera. But at any rate, blacks were racially identified than whites. We tested this in a couple ways. We did what's called a list experiment where we asked people, on a list of 5 options, this is half of the population, the research population, how many of these would you pick? And one of the options in the set of 5 was, transition of my racial or core ethnic identity. Then another half the population got just 4 questions. How many of these would you do? So we were able to see what percentage of whites, blacks, et cetera, in a totally anonymized situation, which at the time was fairly cutting edge methodologically, what percentage of them would alter who they were. And the hacker assumption basically was just wrong. Everybody is prejudiced to the same degree, and those prejudices aren't necessarily negative, was pretty much the conclusion. So I was able to do quite a few tests like that over the years. The starting assumption was that a lot of woke things, men and women don't naturally, quote unquote, sexualize each other, sounded like nonsense. And then you can ask people using these list experiments, these audit studies, these technical tools that we actually do have in social science, what's true and what's false. And I did that, and I found, without boasting, pretty much what I expected. That's all I got.
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting. I wonder if you could comment on the state of social science, because when I listen to you talk now, when I read your books, it sounds like science. But when I listen to or read a lot of social scientists, it sounds like just pure fluff with no connection to reality. Like how are you so different than these other people, and y'all are supposedly in the same discipline?
Well, first of all, I don't think I'm the best social science methodologist out there or something like that. I mean, so there are levels to your question. Gaddis, I forget his first name, but the guy who's done a lot of audit studies of residual but real racism versus Black Americans. He also finds a lot of prejudice against lower income whites. Is a good research methodologist. A bunch of people like that. The Gaddis thing, by the way, is actually really interesting. So there's a whole block of studies that find that people with quote unquote Black names are less likely to be hired than people with quote unquote white names. And a lot of people who are sort of smart conservatives, like Dennis Prager over the years, have pointed out, well, the only way you can have an identifiable ethnic name in the USA is to be perceived as lower class. Like your name is Wilfred. The name of the other guy on the show is Coleman. This would be his point. So Bob Woodson. Glenn Lowry, John McWhorter. So the only way you can be identifiably black on the basis of first name alone is to be named something like Jamarian. And the impact of that on you is probably going to be mostly class-based and not race-based. And this guy Gaddis has actually looked at that. He still finds racism against black people. I don't think he would have gotten published as often as he did if he didn't, but he actually does. But he also notes that if you're a white guy with a name like Bubba or Cheyenne, you're going to have a lot of trouble in the workforce. So I think there are a lot of solid researchers like that. There actually there are two other people, Derolia and Kodal, that responded to Dr. Gaddis. And what they said was that even he is overhyping the level of racism because people don't know whether a black name, quote unquote, that's given by upper middle class parents is in fact given by upper middle class parents. They all sound unusual to a 60-year-old hiring manager. So what these two guys did, without going on and on about this, was look at last names like Hernandez or Black Man, even Washington, that obviously imply you're probably a member of a racial minority, and just give those people first names like Ralph. So everyone knows Ralph Hernandez is a minority, but you can also be pretty certain that's a middle-class guy. What effect does that have on hiring? Nothing, as it turns out. So I guess the point would be there's a lot of good research like this. The issue in the social sciences is that we lean about 95% to the left. And that's not an exaggerated figure. I mean, Colin Wright and other people have used that in published articles. I think in political science, we're 18.6 Democrats and Greens to every one Republican in major departments. Like even I'm pretty far to the right, but I think I'm a registered independent. So it's just a huge gap there. And what that means is basically that all the bullshit on the left is allowed, and the articles on the right have to be fine-tuned. Like me and Bob Moranto's piece on policing, I mean, you have to get every police department, break down number of people of every race killed. Like you've got to be pretty on point to make a basic point like policing reduces crime. But on the flip side of the scale, probably 20% of what you get is articles like my personal exploration of non-binary queerness. I mean, just if you follow the guy I mentioned, my buddy Colin on Twitter, there are dozens of examples of this. Like for this paper, I surveyed 3 sex workers who I was personally intimate with. And you're reading these, like I'm a reviewer, like you're reading these abstracts and it's like, what the fuck are you guys doing? That is a political thing. I mean, and I think the right is capable of the same thing. Like if myself, like Chris Rufo and James Lindsay ran a government agency, there would be a temptation to, if your friend writes a book, is there money available for that? Are you going to ruthlessly criticize it? But if 20 years down the road, when we were replaced by people with lesser credentials, you started getting, why every woman should be a housewife, the conservative case, I don't think that would surprise anyone. And that's where we are with the libs right now. I don't
Oh,
really even know what to do about that in like sociology. It's where it's 59-1.
that's insane. Um, yeah. How do you, again, like, I mean, how do you fix that? Because like some of the studies that you're citing, like I had just heard about them recently when I started reading you, but studied, like there was a study, about how, black names get discriminated against in hiring. That's a very famous study that I had heard for a very long time. And like the type of stuff you're promoting, like just doesn't get nearly as much airtime.
Yeah, it's a problem. I do think it's good that we're getting our own media on the right and center. I mean, like we both have successful podcasts, but a level up from that, I mean, you've got entire networks, like whether that's the Daily Wire or Fire. I mean, so if you find something, and I actually think this is starting to annoy me on the right, where there'll be a story about like an interracial fist fight, and I'll see like 50 giant social media accounts and like Newsmax posted under the header, why is no one talking about this? And at some point you have to say, okay, bros, like we've got 80 million views just like they do. Like this exists today. But I do think that's helping. However, yeah, for a long period of time, I mean, I'll just give the numbers here. You had a situation where academia and the social sciences leaned 90+% to the left. There's a great piece on the Econ Lib, very data, very quant web resource that makes the point that I think when they surveyed 19% of tenured social science faculty were Marxists, like actual communists. Another 24% describe themselves as political radicals, which almost always means on the left, the nuts on the right are reactionary. Another 26%, I think, said they were activists. They wanted to get out there and change society to the left. So you have that. And then the people reporting on these people in the media were almost as far gone. I mean, the media at one point, Pew 2004, was 7% conservative and libertarian. So the other 93%, but definitionally would be Marxist, liberal, and, mostly left-leaning moderate. So that 1-2 punch, I actually think you created kind of a scientific model there. That's the issue. You've got a group that are very, very slanted in one direction. And you have entire fields that are designed to be, right? Like, I guess we have military science on the right or something, but on the left, you've got Black studies, women's studies, peace studies, American studies, post-colonial studies, sociology. I mean, these are some of the larger majors on a lot of colleges. So you have this whole pool of people that are designed to be social change agents. And again, Ferrere, a lot of these people on the left talk about this and will say things like, well, education can either teach you how to work a job and be a good citizen, and that's bad. That's what you don't want to do. Or it can make you a revolutionary who's ready to challenge ideas. And we've got tens of thousands of people that have taken in that second idea. And the question is kind of, how can you get rid of them? What can you do with them?
Hmm. So you've taken a lot of shots, very thoughtful shots at the progressive left, but you've also had some criticism of, I don't even know what you call it, the woke right, the dissident right, the alt right, this new development of kind of radical right wing stuff that is also like illogical and not evidence based. Can you tell me about that kind of deviation away from the facts on the right as well?
Yeah, I mean, so to me, wokeness, and this isn't original to me. I think it's Wokal Distance, the anonymous pundit that coined this phrase in one of his articles. But wokeness is basically Gnosticism, and if you're familiar with like the mystical Christianity and Judaism, the Gnostic is someone who believes that the entire world, as it appears, like most competitions, are reasonably fair. There are organized structures in life that indicate either evolution or a designer, blah, blah, blah. All of that is this terrible trap that's set up to determine the very few people who can see the reality underlying it. The idea that the devil is the prince of this world comes from this. You're supposed to do something very different from what logically appears to be the goal of life, the vows of chastity and that kind of thing. But also, the structure of the world around you is this terrible lie that could mislead you away from happiness, that could send you to hell. That's religious Gnosticism. The Wokel's idea that woke is Gnosticism is basically woke people almost to a man believe that the facially fair structure of society, i.e., you have to take the SAT test to get into college, is in fact designed to oppress some out of favor group by some in favor group, i.e., the real purpose of the SAT is to get more whites in college. That's the Gnostic idea. Like every structure, criminal justice, that's one of the obvious ones, but elite academic admissions, Fortune 500 hiring, everything is designed by the oppressor to control and regulate the oppressed. So if you ever read like Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, what'd you think of the book?
I mean, I feel like it was very close to the documentary The 13th, where it's like when you're reading it without any kind of counter narrative, it's extremely convincing, very heart wrenching, and then you start to read someone like you and like, oh, I never heard that side of the story.
Yeah, there are more minority men in prison because we commit more crime. And like, I'm not racist in any direction. I mean, I would assume that something like 95% of trans males cutting off their penises would be white. I'm not no hate for the Caucasian community, but I mean, I would assume a huge percentage of drug overdoses, vehicular homicides, all that sort of thing would involve Caucasians. But I mean, when you look at street crime, that's a pathology in lower income Black and Hispanic neighborhoods right now. So that's it. Like if you adjust for that in the model, which is called not being univariate, being multivariate, you see that the relationship that Dr. Alexander talks about goes away entirely. So this is the whole thing with all of Black Lives Matter and so on, by the way. Like the BLM argument is, well, 250 Black men are killed each year by the police. That's a lot by global standards. I'm steel manning their argument here. The response, though, is, well, 1,000 people every year. Can you still hear me, by the way?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So well, it's like reconnect spinning wheels. But okay, the response is, well, okay, but 1,000 people every year are killed by the police, and the rest are all lower income whites, natives, and Hispanics. Like, what do you say to that? And the next point for the Black Lives Matter activist will be, well, but 25 is more than 13% of 1,000. We only make up 13% of the country. So even though you pushed me back one level, I found racism on the second level. But the response there is just, okay, but the crime rate for young black men is 5 times the crime rate for everyone else. Did you adjust for that? And when I did, there's maybe a 1 or 2% gap that's plausibly attributable to racism. No one denies that like racism has existed, but that's it. That's the entire huge story that you guys have made up is not real. But the thing with Gnosticism, though, the Gnostic argues that a system like criminal justice looks fair, but in fact is designed to imprison blacks or something like that. The woke right, and I'll actually do one more point here. Every major form of kind of liberal theology is just this idea. So a radical feminist, a 4B feminist, would say society is structured by men to oppress women. Women are the oppressed class. And that's how you get some of these ideas like marriage is a dynamic designed by men to achieve the ultimate male sexual fantasy and to obtain as much sex as possible. And if you actually look at how men view marriage, that's almost totally nonsensical. Like guys view it as sort of a sacrifice you make for your true love. You're probably going to have less sex. You're going to have 2.5 kids, buy a house. But the feminist view is that's an illusion. The reality is the oppression of women. And similarly, I mean, black radicals view society as structured to benefit whites and oppress blacks. Gay radicals, LGBT activists view society as structured to benefit good-looking straight people and oppress them, and so on through every other category. The woke right is just a right-wing variation on this, where the group that is supposedly running society from behind the scenes becomes what? Well, usually the Jews, maybe the feminists themselves, the rich, which is at least plausible. But it's the woke idea of the Gnostic system that's really evil, where there are Morlocks hiding under the earth. It's just the groups have been switched in and out.
Interesting. So I loved your book, Hate Crime Hoax, and there's certainly a lot of good accounting of different fake hate crimes. But what I found so interesting about it is how much social capital comes to people from faking a hate crime, and how many groups started to do it. I mean, there was black people, Muslims, gay people, and you started to see these white people who I think there was a story of a white guy who set his truck on fire because he said, well, people hate me because I love Black Lives Matter too much. What can you tell me about social capital that comes from people for faking hate crimes?
Well, I mean, I think that people respond to incentives, and there are levels to this. So, like on Twitter today, I got in this vicious argument with a bunch of young, mostly right-wing men because I said, like most guys, I've looked at porn before, but I view that as a minor vice for men. And if porn sites required ID, or more simply just required you to pay $9.99 a month on the old model, you'd have fewer men watching porn. And this is just obviously true, but all these guys responded saying things like, what are you? They'll just go to the dark net. They'll find the worst stuff available. Don't try to take away what I love from me. And I'm having fun just arguing back and forth in the comments, but the basic point that people respond to incentives is pretty standard. It's Econ 101. It's probably remedial econ before you get there. And I think that over the past 50 years, we've really reversed the incentives in society. So, I mean, affirmative action practically makes it logical to say you're a minority on any sort of collegiate or work application, even if you're in reality like 1/4 Native American Indian. Um, and there are many things like this. We've seen a dramatic increase in the rate of dubious sexual assault claims. And it's really awkward to make that point as a man. But if it's no longer at all abusive to make a claim like this in the policing system, and also we have more kind of caddish, unpleasant boyfriends, whether or not they're rapists, most of them probably aren't, you have an incentive structure that's gonna maximize that happening. And it's the same thing with hate crimes. Like, when we looked at hate offenses or fake allegations of hate offenses, what happened in most cases was not, and this is similar to the last example or two, but was not that people were dragged into the basement of the campus police station for a hard, unsympathetic interview where the truth was uncovered. And then in the 50+% of cases where something really had happened, the cops went after that guy. What we saw instead was that colleges did things like throw parades on campus. So there'd be a 2-day rally against hate after the report. And I think it's hard not to conclude that that incentivized this happening. More people saw positive responses. People also saw a chance to put themselves in the oppressed group. And I think this explains a lot of the whites. Like when you mentioned this white guy who claimed that he was such an ally to black people that he had, I think that was a Klansman after him in the false report. I'd have to check. But I mean, what you're doing is saying, well, I'm not just a boring, neurotypical white guy from Cleveland, in which case I'd have no oppression points, given how the campus works. I am one of you, so I'm in the category political radical. And this happens a lot with urban college-age white people, where people will say, I mentioned I'm neurodivergent, but will claim that they are so autistic or OCD that they can't function and are in practice a minority. They're someone who receives extra time on tests at the university and that kind of thing. People will describe themselves as being fat as though it were an ethnicity. We've seen the body positivity movement, so on, over the past 20 years. People will look for some kind of minority identity that they have. There's a hilarious story. I don't know if we have time to go through it, but one of my buddies has about white women on dating apps and their descriptions of themselves. But I think that's where the hate crimes come in. Like you think you will be rewarded for doing this and you will then join the special class.
That's interesting. So, Dr. Reilly, can you tell me what are some lies that your liberal teacher told you?
Yeah, there are quite a few. I mean, the book has 10 chapters. Probably the two that have gotten the most attention are slavery wasn't a unique white Western vice. In fact, white Westerners ended slavery. And two, Native American, the actual title of the chapter here is designed to be funny, but it's Native Americans didn't spend all day in dancing and making love. I mean, so the first point, both of those points together, I think, center on something very important, which is that the rules have kind of changed over the past 100 years, and I think that's mostly good. I think we've gone a little too far in the weak leaf eater direction. But what you see a lot of on the left is the application of modern standards regarding racism, dating, so on to the historical past, consent, warfare, only in the case of white societies, and then the conclusion that the white societies fail. Women couldn't vote until 1920. How can we be proud to be part of this country? The problem with that, though, is that morals either are not real or are changeable based on external stimuli. And I mean real in the ultimate sense. Obviously, we should have laws. But because of those two facts, every society ever to exist has had different rules than the societies that preceded it. So in the slavery chapter, I talk about how slave is one of the oldest human words. I mean, if you go back to Sumerian glyphs, the image for slave literally means defeated warrior. One iteration of it resembles a person in shackles. Another one just means man from the mountains. So every society ever to exist until, not coincidentally, modern machinery came along. You're talking about the Mongols, you're talking about the Aztecs, you're talking about the Romans, the gladiators, you're talking about the Greeks. All of them had tons of slaves. So I go into Africa and how slavery worked in Africa. I go into the Islamic world. And obviously, most people who are casual history buffs, including a lot of men, know that the Islamic slave trade was larger in scope than the Western Atlantic slave trade. It was 17 million people versus 12 million people. So I talk about that, and then I talk about the abolition of slavery and how that began in the West. And the same thing in the Native chapter. I mean, my family has some Native background, at least as I understand. The Natives were great warriors and poets in that literal Scotsman sort of sense. But I mean, they were also unimaginably brutal by our standards. So I talk about what life actually was like in that kind of Stone Age or Bronze Age environment. What was it like for women? What was it like for warrior class men if you got captured? I look at some of the battles between the natives and the whites, and I make the point that there's no intentional genocide on either side most of the time. I mean, people at this point didn't really have the germ theory of disease. They wouldn't have known how to do that. There are just these sort of half-organized clashes that went on for 400 years, and in the end left the natives mostly dispossessed, but still as 2% of the country. And that population, in fact, is growing at a faster than normal rate. So that's kind of the summary. The narrative you've been given of West bad by our standards is nonsense because none of the honorable people alive then, white or brown or quote unquote red, followed our standards today. And so I have some fun applying the same standards to other societies. How would the Comanche do? How would the Aztecs, who used to sacrifice small children to the rain god Tlaloc because he liked tears, how would any of these people fare by modern dorm room moral calculus?
Hmm. That's so interesting because I feel like when you step foot onto a college campus, like the rules completely change when you're in those classrooms. And, whatever the Aztecs did, you're not supposed to think about, but some like microaggression that happened yesterday is like the biggest thing in the world. Like why do we adjust the rules in that way? It seems so bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm not sure that we actually do in practice. I mean, I read a fascinating article the other day about how 88% of, I believe it was Ivy League and Big Ten students regularly lie to seem more liberal than they are. And so you create this weird pattern where women are pretending to be radical feminists, and so men pretend to be allies to pursue them, or where people are pretending that they're deeply in agreement with gender ideology, and in fact, almost no one is. One of the more surprising polls that I ever did, actually, this is definitely not fully scientific, but it's very large end. Like, it was on Twitter, totally anonymous. I had an attached SurveyMonkey real poll link. And I asked people, do you feel that people with penises can become women? The actual question was a little glibber. Is, do you feel some women have 9-inch penises? And I expected, because my page has kind of a male bro audience, as you know, but everyone's feminist girlfriend and fiance is also on the page. My friends from grad school are on the page. So I expected probably 30% yes, like you could have phrased that better, Doc, but of course, trans women are women. The actual response to do some women have penises was 2% yes across males and females, and I still have that figure available. So I think a lot of times there's a emperor has no clothes kind of situation going on where people are saying woke, almost crazy things because they hear other people saying woke, almost crazy things. And no one ever just stops and thinks and realizes, look, 95% of the people, they're fraternity men in this classroom can't possibly believe this. So I don't think everyone on a college campus actually thinks this sort of crap. I think the professor does. I think a few radicals do. And that pushes other people to adjust their behavior. The more interesting part of your point, though, I think is you said, why is it considered almost taboo to look at what the Aztecs and another highly civilized people did historically? Why would we just focus on us? There actually are kind of weirdo left-wing, quote unquote, theoretical explanations for all of this. So, like, an actual radical would argue that you should look with what's called the eye of skepticism at your own society, because you're going to be predisposed to like your society. So you should be as cruel, harsh, and critical, I believe is the language, toward your culture as possible. And you should not apply that to other cultures. You should assume that your culture's coverage of reality in other cultures is biased, evil, racist, and so on. And I don't assume that at all. I apply about a 5% lens of bias to explorers from the West and the East, just like I do to Japanese travel guides about the USA. But I noticed that a Japanese or European guide to the USA is mostly accurate. The places that they're telling you to go in New York City or Chicago or Austin actually exist. So what we've got is this weird situation because all these ancient peoples could write, right? So, I mean, you have like Bernal Diaz's The Conquest of Mexico, which is richly sourced, which has, some Aztec contributions to it, at least in terms of conversations with him. And he says things like this was a great civilized people. They were doughty warriors that fought us well, but they also ate people. And they had butcher shops that were full of human meat. And this is where they ate people. And on this location, which you can discover, they built a giant tower of human skulls. And all of that, when we actually started using ground scanning radar and so on, turned out to be true. But the attitude of a leftist toward that would be kind of getting to the point, you shouldn't believe that. That's propaganda from one side in a war. My attitude would be, it might be slightly biased, but there are hundreds of these stories. So we should actually assume that our society is in many practical ways better than other societies.
Hmm. Wow. Now, that's a lot to digest right there. That
No
is
pun
very
intended.
interesting. Yeah. Um, so one of the things I'm finishing my internship to be a clinical mental health therapist, and you've had some criticisms of the therapy profession. Can you talk about that to me?
Yeah, sure, glad to. I think they're good therapists, but overall for men, therapy doesn't work. And there are The question is why. Like, I think the thing with empirical quantitative data is that it can't really be wrong. I mean, you can miss, the census can miss a certain block of houses. You can have 2% more blacks than you think or something. But in general, if you find that 50% of American murders are committed by African Americans, but 89% of the suicides are white males, you kind of know what each group needs to work on. There's not really, can't be wrong is an exaggeration, but there's not really an issue with the data points either one of those, right? So, I mean, when you look at therapy, what you find is that there are a bunch of papers that find that, especially for males, especially for people who don't have core mental health issues, having sex, which doesn't surprise me at all, but running, I try to avoid that one. Working out, just like without banter, going down a list of other things, talking with friends that are, same social class and reasonably functional. Those things have either the same positive effect as standard talk therapy or more of an effect. And that sort of makes sense. I mean, once you've gotten to the point of recognizing you have a problem and recognizing the potential source of the problem, abuse or something like that, I'm not really sure the literature supports the idea that talking about the problem more is going to have a positive effect. So, in fact, I'm pretty sure it doesn't, and am being a bit polite. So, I mean, I think therapy can be very positive if you go into a practitioner that's not a woke lunatic, or I guess a lunatic on the other side. You have 10 sessions, maybe. They give you some CBT tips and also some real talk, and they tell you this is what you can probably do with this, given where you are in life, what your stress level is. What most people seem to do with therapy, which is a long or even continuous number of sessions with someone who's kind of a paid friend. I see that a lot in the American upper middle class. I don't think that works at all. What do you think?
That's no, that's very interesting. A big part of my channel is to stop the corruption in therapy, especially the heavy politicization.
Yeah.
But also kind of adjacent issues to that, like affirmative therapy, where basically the customer's always right mentality, and kind of a coddling. I think I do think good therapy works. I really do. But I think part of that has to be some degree of confrontation, because if someone's life is not going in the right direction, I think that has to be adjusted in some way. And you can't just affirm someone and tell them they're a beautiful little flower that's blossoming.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a really obvious good faith point because, like, you're with a mental health professional. Like, obviously, everything's not going okay. You think you're crazy or something close to it. I mean, there's a less blunt term, but if you take that person that's dealing with these extreme mental health issues, has razor slashes on their arm and so on, and agree with everything they're saying, that strikes me as not only idiotic, but also a term might be iatrogenic. Like there's going to be a doctor cause harm there. That's going to be profoundly negative. And Alison Shriver, I believe, uses that term in the book Bad Therapy, where she says, obviously there are people, and if pushed, I'd probably agree with this, that are returning war veterans or something that need to go talk to someone who's actually a psychologist or a psychiatrist and can explain why they're seeing burning enemy soldiers in their dreams and so on. But if you take people that have normal day-to-day issues at the my girl said no level, which really does seem to inspire a lot of the manosphere, and you put them in a room with someone who's basically a doctor who can prescribe pills, who's going to do these mind-wrenching talk techniques, so on, you run the risk of the negative effects of that far outweighing the positive. So first, is the doctor even willing to do that? Or is the doctor just going to be like, yeah, you're great. That's point one for $600 an hour. Or two, even if you get past that, are you at a level where you need that level of care? And I don't think most people are. I mean, if you look at psych med prescriptions in the USA, antidepressants, Wellbutrin, Prozac, Adderall, they're 22 times South Korea and Switzerland, if I have that correct. Now, South Korea and
Wow, I didn't
Switzerland,
know that.
I'm sorry?
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, I'd have to look up the exact numbers, but it's like the number of, I guess it couldn't be 22% this year, but the number of young white women that are diagnosably mentally ill in the USA and that are on some kind of drug, I think is 56%. Switzerland among
Yeah.
females is 5. So, I mean, nobody denies that there actually are people that see aliens. And even beyond kind of the joking, like layman's view of mental health care, there also are people that really like were captured by the Iraqi Republican Guard who need to do things that are going to relieve that negative experience. A friend of mine, military veteran, special forces guy, has PTSD. He's very frank about it. There are times when he won't go out to a bar or something like that with us if that's going to be crowded. He goes to PTSD counseling twice a year for 2 weeks. And I think that's useful. But most people weren't special forces operators. So, I mean, I think you are looking at that 1,000 to 2,000 percent overprescription, and that's an issue.
So, I mean, it sounds like you're mostly pretty negative on therapy. If you were like wave a magic wand and like fix the therapy profession, is there anything that you would redirect it towards, or would you just say like get rid of 90% of it?
You know, I don't think I'd say get rid of 90% of it. What I would probably do, first of all, if I could literally wave a magic wand and change it, would be make the profession representative in political and gender terms. So this is one of the big problems with a lot of the social sciences, and it's one reason people don't trust them. Like I half jokingly said earlier, if myself and Chris Rufo ran a college and we kept putting out monographs on why every woman should be a housewife, like we're both quite competent, academic executives, but the average businesswoman would start looking at that and saying, what are these quacks up to? Even if the statistics were good, there'd be the question of why do they keep researching this topic? Like why is every paper about male-headed households? And that's kind of where I think the academy is when it comes to racism. Like we've discovered racism in the delivery of babies, following our discovery of racism in the transportation of pregnant mothers to the hospital via cab. At some point, you have to ask, well, what about social class? And when are you going to move on to topic two? By the way, the paper about delivery of babies was, again, complete nonsense. They didn't adjust for the single variable of difficulty of the pregnancy, which meant they didn't adjust for the age of the doc and the skill level of the doctor that was performing any medical procedures that had to be done. Older, more skilled doctors tend to be white. So as soon as you adjust for that, there actually, I think, is a slight advantage for black mothers. And that's before you get into obesity and drug use and other issues. Drug use would probably be about the same for whites. But anyway, I mean, so the question is, why are we constantly looking for the same things? Racism, sexism. I think that applies in every social science. I'm pretty positive it applies in therapy. Right now, therapists, I believe, lean, again, it's one of these crazy figures, 70 to 80% to the left, 70 to 80% female.
At least.
Yeah. I don't think they're as bad as we are in terms of political bias as sociologists or political scientists, but still, like as a male executive, if I went to a fourth wave feminist woman and honestly described my personality, I'm pretty sure she'd say I was crazy. But that's just meaningless. Like if the same woman sat down with me and honestly spelled out all her sexual and financial fantasies, I would think she was a lunatic. Which is why people don't speak as openly in political outgroup, different sex, so on environments. So I think you do need to fix that in the profession. I would also set up some serious barriers for who can be a client and how long someone can be a client. Probably about a third of the upper middle class women I know just have a therapist. Like they've had a therapist since childhood. If you date them or marry them, it's a bill, like hairdressing. And I think that's profoundly unhealthy. Like I have equivalents, I'm sure, like golf with the boys that cost money that involve talk, but there's a recognition that that is not intended as something medical where you should listen to every bit of advice that's given. So I would rearrange the profession and I would, cap how long people in it could engage with clients. Those are two things that come to mind.
Yeah, it almost seems like for a certain type of upper middle class progressive white woman, having a therapist is like its own type of social capital, like having a Rolex or something.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just white. I mean, black and Asian women are probably, when you get up into that bracket, you went to Illinois on up. I mean, it's probably pretty much the same. But yeah, I think so. I think it's considered one of the accoutrements of modern up middle class life. I don't know how much, I don't know what's causal for that, but I would say that it's probably not a coincidence that you started seeing this, just like you started seeing the extreme prevalence of upscale sex work, like OnlyFans and escorting, around the time that a lot of in-person human relationships started to fall apart. So I'm not going to be glib enough to say that like sitting there just talking about yourself for 3 hours with someone nodding is the female equivalent of going to a prostitute, but there's probably something kind of similar to that. Like that was traditionally the date before, the male portion of the evening, the part for both of you kicked off. And that's
I'm
actually a
not
joke.
I'm
Sorry,
not licensed yet, so I'm not going to comment on that one.
yeah, but that's just like one of the jokes I put on Twitter, and I didn't really expect any backlash reaction to this, but I got a huge negative one. I think it's because of the background that we're talking about. But I basically said, like, if I wanted to spend $300 listening to a feminist woman critique my views on politics and business, I would just take one on a dinner date. And all these people started commenting and saying, well, that's not all a therapist does, you bastard. How dare you? And it's like, you can usually tell if you're doing comedy, essentially, in a big speech or something like that, when you've hit a positive or a negative nerve. And this is definitely one of those negative nerves. Like, you guys are paying $300 an hour to talk to people about problems that have remained unsolved for 15 years. Let's look at why that is. Like, is there a significant moral difference between that and not a prostitute, but a geisha girl house or something like that? And I think a
Hmm.
lot of people asked anonymously would say, no, there's not. I think it's very taboo to note that in public, within that social group, at least.
Hmm. So I've got two questions left for you. The first one is you seem to have a very heterodox take on IQ. You've debated that with both the left and the right. You talked about how I feel like a lot of the IQ people have a heavy preference for heritability, but you talked about how it's got a big potential to increase over time. You've got a lot of different views on IQ. What can you tell me about that?
Okay, let me take a few notes there. So, yeah, I mean, I think that. So, first of all, I think that one of the reasons so many people in the internet debate culture are so obsessed with IQ is that they're racist. And I don't say that in any kind of, shock sort of sense. I mean, they have a mild to strong in group preference, and they tend to talk about the things where they think their group is doing well. You see this with black men with athletics as well. But I mean, so I think that's part of the background. And so the idea that there are big hereditarian IQ differences is going to appeal to someone who has that moderate but real prejudice. In fact, there's a huge ongoing debate. So if you follow some of the people, both online and in the journals, who are really exploring at the fringes of this, like Sasha Gusev or Chanda Chisala, they tend to be political moderates that are just sort of their position as well. Yeah, the evidence indicates genes play a role, but also you get smarter the more years you experience education in a good school. And that's kind of my take. I mean, when you look at IQ, the question that the average, just better than layman would ask is, can you boost IQ? And the answer to that, can you boost IQ, like your tested score on an IQ test, is yes. I'm sure this video will draw some negative comments, but that's not in dispute. Like the quote unquote Flynn effect is the increase of the entire Western world's tested IQ by 18.6 points, I think, since 1950. And the way we can measure this is that when you take an IQ test, you answer a bunch of questions, and they're basically SAT questions. They're knowledge of skilled things like plane geometry, PLANE, verbal ability, so on down the line. Even shape rotation is something that you learn from things like playing video games or shooting at the range. It's not something that you just understand as a Tanganyikan sheep herder. So over the years, we've seen the number of questions that produce that median 100 score that we always set the test at. It's increased by 23 or whatever. So if you took an IQ test and you got a perfectly middle of the pack 100 score in 1950, you'd get an 82 today. All of this is uncontested. So, like, as we've gone to better schools, as we started educating women, as blacks and whites no longer have to fight each other on contacts, you can have an integrated school in the South. You've seen, as we started eating better, as we stopped drinking 4 bourbons a day, like, as all these things have happened, you've seen a substantial growth in baseline IQ scoring. And I don't think anyone disputes that. A good recent example that just came out is the Somali community in Minneapolis. So if you spend a lot of time online debating, which you probably do since you're on my page and we chopped it up for a while about this conversation, but you'll see people saying things like Somalia's got an IQ of 68. And I think it's funny to engage in banter with foreign rivals. I think I see why people are saying that. But, like, let's try to unpack what that would actually mean. Like, 70 is the cutoff for mental retardation, right? So you can't actually believe that a major African nation, conflicted by war but running 2 international ports, has an average IQ below the level of developmental delay. Like, that's not possible. They have an airport now. So what that obviously means is that there's a lot less training for people, and especially for women and girls over there to some extent. Anyway, the account IO, which leans to the right of me, I think they actually have me blocked because they don't like my IQ stats, but they produce.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
it easily could be because I said something immature in response to their claim about my IQ stats or whatever. Like, we're all serious people. We're arguing on computers.
I
But I
think y'all got into it a while back about like Nigerian education levels.
Yeah, that I think was a silly conversation. I got into an argument with a guy who calls himself Cremu, who,
Yeah.
yeah, is a good statistician. I'm pretty sure he has professional employment somewhere and is using a burner. But he said Nigerians are not that impressive of an immigrant group. And I responded and said that clearly they are. They're the highest, most educated immigrant population in the USA. And it got into a real technical womp off where he like pulled up the American Community Survey and was like, no, they're not. Taiwanese people beat them last year. And my response probably at that point should have just been, okay, they're the second most educated immigrant group in the USA. But instead, we got this whole thing about African IQs and so on. And I mean, most people who observed it just said, well, both of you guys made some points. I don't care. I'm not a recent African immigrant. So, it's good that there are these debate forums online. But in all seriousness, Nigerians, yeah, combined second generation, I think it's 66% undergraduate and graduate education. So that fact, the baseline around that isn't much disputed. And I think if you're able to isolate out like Igbo tested IQs or something like that, they would be quite good. But the point that I was making actually is about a lower performing community, at least in the USA. Somalia, the claim is, has an IQ of 68. But recently, as IO uncovered, I mean, the Somali community in Minneapolis sat for a lot of the NAEP, PISA, whatever the exact exam was, board tests that are really close corollaries for IQ tests. And we were able to calculate what the IQ of Somali Americans, who are often still isolated from society, often still not fluent English speakers, so on, would be. And that I think was 87, which isn't great. But I mean, the black IQ over the years has varied between 85 and 91. So it was a normal American level IQ performance before you adjust for class, before you adjust for anything. That also comes up with black Americans, by the way. So, I mean, I think that's my point on IQ. Like, if you say that country X is performing at X level, an obvious check, and this is the one sentence I should have led with, an obvious check is just looking at what relatively non-selected people from that country are doing in the first world. So if you're seriously claiming the IQ in Nigeria is 84, you'd have to explain why the IQ of Nigerians in London is probably about 103. It's very difficult to do that from the hereditarian perspective. So I actually don't deny that there are, potentially some small group gaps between races and all the variables that people debate in that sort of bro community. I mean, this would be true for height, penis size, leaving that one behind, athletic ability, swimming ability. So every group can make these sort of comments. We can test the number of fast twitch muscle fibers people have or something like that. But when you put people in an equivalent environment of trained skill production, I was a competitive track runner for quite a while. What you'll see is that at the top of the spectrum, these gaps are very, very small. The Kenyan marathon record, which obviously is the human marathon record, I believe is about 2:01. But the white record, admittedly set on a wet course, but is 2:04. That's 2 hours, 4 minutes. Asian record's 2 hours, 5 minutes. So I think, and that's over a 26-mile race course, right? You got a 3-minute difference. So I think if we ever really improve rural white and inner city schools, if we ever do large scale tests of this in a serious fashion in the USA, because this is all very taboo, I think those are the kind of group gaps you would see. But the basic point of, can we increase IQ? Yes, of course you can increase IQ. If you don't know how to read, your score on a verbal IQ test is going to be 0.
It seems so common sense, but it also feels very controversial. It's when you swim in those waters.
Yeah, I think that's partly because the hereditarian guys on the right, they have a different, and it's a sophisticated paradigm. It's not just nonsense. But I mean, they have a different paradigm. They don't want to agree with that. Where you'd really expect to see culturalism or individual achievement theory is on the left, center left, kind of Noah Smith zone. But the problem there is that leftists have convinced themselves that IQ basically doesn't exist for 50 years. Because until Thomas Sowell, Rich Nesbitt, other people started coming along and making my points, which aren't original to me, it seemed like you just had this big gap to explain. I mean, you had, in 1980, what would it be? I mean, blacks at 85 or 86, whites at like 99, Asians kicking everybody's ass, 100 something, Hispanics probably down there with the black community. How do you explain these gaps without invoking group identity or, for that matter, calling every white person a bigot? Well, it was very tempting just to say these tests, they don't mean much. They measure your zip code. The reality is that we now know IQ is predictive at about zero point 0.4, 40% with your entire market basket of life success. The point is just that IQ can be trained, can be developed. I mean, I've mentioned that in my own life, I went from on one of the major IQ proxy tests an 1100 to a 1450. So that simply reflects the fact that I'm no longer sitting at a desk at East Aurora High School that has GDK carved on the front of it, with a book from 1994. I am now at the point of my second score. I'm at the University of Illinois. I'm sitting on a fast running computer. I'm sober. I'm drinking high end coffee. Like, there are all these things that would produce that outcome. So you gotta take that. It is a commonsensical point, I think.
It's such a fascinating rabbit hole to go down as well. Um, my final question for you is, when you look at society more broadly, what is one issue that we're not talking about enough that we should be talking about more?
I mean, potential human extinction, I think, is the obvious one. Any of the things that we're doing, from promoting the feminist v bro competition online through very scientific algorithms to a point where the fertility rate is now like 0.9 among upper middle class Americans, i.e., one baby per two people per life. That's not good. I don't think climate change is very serious, but we should certainly address it, take some of the Swedish papers seriously. But AI is another good example. We seem to be designing godlike robots that have apparently an instinct to prevent themselves from being turned off. I'd be very curious about what checks Elon Musk and Bill Gates, who I love, but who don't strike me as the most mature men in the world, what checks exist on those. I don't want to see a lot of naked girls from Grok Imagine. I want to understand that this will not take all jobs. So, I mean, there are all these tools that we seem to be playing around with that are potentially world devastating, even nuclear bombs. I mean, a friend of mine is a Russian, and his father had a general's level rank in the old Soviet Union, just the sort of guy you'd meet at an Ivy or good state university. And I was talking to him once and I said, well, in the USA, we're trying to mothball some of our nuclear program. I mean, there's some missiles that we are decommissioning right now. What did you Russians do in the USSR collapse? And he said, oh, we didn't do anything. Yeah, like all those bombs. I mean, we took them out of like Kazakhstan, but other than that, they're just sitting out there in the Rodina, the term for their great open heartland. We've got a couple in Siberia. So, I mean, at some point, we're going to see a new sun rise over some city when a terrorist gets one of those, or a drunk general just presses a button. So there are all of these doomsday technologies that we've created, potentially AI, recombinant DNA technology, nuclear weapons, hydrogen bomb weapons, that we've never really regulated in any serious sense. So I think the goal of the next century should be kind of cracking down on the end of 20th century experimentation and making sure humans are still here in a couple hundred years.
All right, where can people find you?
Oh, yeah, people can find me. The easiest way to find me, or almost anybody else, is just to Google their name. I'm Wilfred Reilly, WILFRED REILLY. You'll find my Twitter, website, Free Black Thought AI profile, Facebook, all that kind of thing. So reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation, Dr. Reilly.
All right, thanks, brother. Enjoyed it.